So hello and welcome to URM's Building Cyber Resilience webinar. What we're really going to drill down onto and focus on today are some practical steps for reducing the likelihood and impact of a cyber breach. We're not going into huge technical detail today. We'll be touching on some technical aspects, but we're very much staying at a higher level. My name's Lisa Dargan, and I'm delighted today to be joined by Wayne Armstrong, who's one of URM's senior governance, risk and compliance consultants.
Hi, everyone.
And I'm also joined by Mike Emery, who is a senior technical consultant.
Hiya.
Welcome both. Thank you for joining us today. So agenda, really simple agenda today. We're first of all going to look at the current cyber threat landscape. And this is more about where are those threats coming from? What is the current situation? Then we're going to look at some cost-effective approaches and some real practical steps for putting you in a stronger position, strengthening your defences. And finally, we're going to look at preparing for the inevitable. And yes, we do mean the inevitable in terms of making sure you're in a good position. So let me just give you a little bit of information about URM for those who aren't familiar with us. This year, we celebrated our 20th birthday back in June. So we are 20 years old and we joined forces with Cooper Parry as well this year. In terms of from a cyber perspective, we come at this really from two angles. From Mike's perspective, on our cyber team, that's really more where we're looking at the technical checking. So here I'm more thinking about penetration testing, Cyber Essentials Plus, those kinds of areas that sit within that. Wayne comes from our GRC side, our governance, risk and compliance side, and that's really looking at people, process, the approach we've got, supplier management, risk management, those areas. So when we look at cyber, we very much come at it from a holistic perspective, taking both areas into account. As you'll learn today, we have a team of about 45, 50 consultants, but they are a very passionate group of people who really understand their subject and are very passionate about helping organisations improve and get that right. They've worked both sides of the fence. So many of you sitting there thinking, okay, how can I improve? Where am I? They've worked both as consultants and equally on an in-house basis. Let me just briefly introduce you to Wayne and Mike. Great photos, guys, by the way. Wayne's, as mentioned, on our GRC side. Wayne's been involved with information security since 2001?
For a while, we normally say.
For a while. For a while, and is a 27001 lead implementer, lead auditor. He's a PCI QSA, equally a risk specialist, and gets very heavily involved in training. So Wayne's got a real broad spectrum. Mike's been involved in offensive security since 2012, so still a while, but not quite Wayne's while, should we say, and worked across many sectors, involved in many things from, I suppose, if I can try and describe it, Mike, as your straightforward penetration testing, what should I be doing to put myself in a better place, through to the stuff on the edge, getting involved in some testing of things that aren't quite straightforward and really kind of driving those edge areas. So let's kick off and start by looking at the current cyber threat landscape. What is that? Now, here we're not talking about going into a lot of technical detail again, but here we're looking about where are those risks and threats coming from?
Yeah, so what you'll probably see on this slide is something that is quite familiar to a lot of organisations. And the reason I'm confident in saying that is because some of the numbers that I'm using within these slides have come from a government survey that is conducted annually. It's published by the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology, and it essentially asks questions around cybersecurity, the sorts of breaches that organisations have experienced, what they did about those things, where they perceive their weaknesses to be, and all of the related subjects. So one caveat to just mention is that obviously these percentages only apply to the respondents to that survey, but you could probably extrapolate from this the fact that these are probably applicable to most organisations. So as you can see at the top of the list, and something that is probably experienced by most organisations that are listening to the call at the moment, is phishing. So 85% of the organisations that responded to the survey have said that they have experienced phishing attacks in some way, shape, or form during the previous 12 months. And the sorts of things that can lead to could be things like data being exposed, credentials being compromised, so usernames and passwords, etc., which could lead to compromising things like business emails. And so therefore you get access to things like password reset processes, which will give you more access information or more credentials to enable you to access different systems, etc. So there's lots of different things that could happen off the back of phishing. And
is that in the main your standard phishing? I know there's like various types of phishing.
Yeah, I mean, there's different ways of extracting information from people. Email phishing with the link in the email message is by far the most common, but you've got things such as the text message variation and that kind of thing. But the headline is phishing. It could be various types.
Okay, makes sense.
The next one down, 34% of organizations said they'd experienced some kind of an impersonation or spoofing attack. So one or two of the sort of examples of this that we've come across with different organizations is where, for example, a third party has had their email spoofed. And so therefore the attacker is then able to send a request for an invoice to be paid to your organization with maybe change of bank account details and things like that included. And so then you end up settling that invoice, but you send the money to the wrong recipient.
Got it.
It's those kinds of scams. But essentially impersonation or spoofing is somebody or something even pretending to be something it's not.
Yeah, makes sense.
Then we get down to malware. So this is infection of computer systems with whether it be viruses or worms or whatever it could be. And again, all sorts of different impacts associated with virus infection or malware infection. There could be information deleted. It could be information copied or accessed without permission, etc. And there's a subset of that, subset of malware, which is ransomware, which is the type of thing that's making the headlines. It's not by itself, it's not a huge number in terms of people that have experienced it, but it's the sort of thing that's making the headlines at the moment. And it's been around for a few years. And this is the kind of attack where your information within your systems gets encrypted.
Yeah.
And then the attacker asks for payment for them to then release the keys for you to get your data back.
And that's been the ones that have been quite headline news, supposedly, with data being held elsewhere.
Exactly. Held to ransom.
Yeah. So now we understand that the significance, because there's a lot going on, there's a lot in the news, there's a lot of press, and clearly the stats are quite high. What are some of the weaknesses or risks that are emerging?
By far, the largest weakness is wherever there is a person or people involved. So weaknesses really come from the human factors. And so that could be genuine user error where somebody makes a mistake, but a lot of the time there are reasons for those errors taking place. So it could be a lack of adherence to procedures, for example. But one of the biggest things is training and awareness. Organizations are not providing sufficient and relevant or up-to-date training and awareness to people in order for them to be able to do things like recognize a phishing attack, for example. Yeah. And considering that phishing attacks, again, using that example moving forwards, are becoming more and more sophisticated since the advent of AI, they're becoming more and more difficult to spot. So therefore, more and more sophisticated training would be useful to give us a chance of spotting these things when they happen. And so when we're not providing this training and awareness, then there's more success in terms of the attacks of those things that I've previously mentioned, such as phishing and impersonation. And that some of these numbers are fairly staggering, to be honest, when you look at them. So this is out of the survey. Only 19% of businesses provide regular staff training on cybersecurity. So they might provide it during induction, but then they never look at it again. Whereas what we should be doing is looking at what the threat landscape looks like, look at the sophistication of attacks, etc., and the types of attacks that are happening, update the training material accordingly every now and again, and then re-provide it. So we should at least be doing annual training, but as on top of that, send out awareness emails and things like that when we see a new threat that might apply to us, etc.
And whilst I appreciate we're going to talk about mitigations later, is it a good idea to send out, I don't know, on a monthly basis, when all this stuff is in the news, these are some of the ways in which these organisations have been compromised. So look out for, be aware of.
Definitely, yeah.
Understand these.
Keep information security, cyber security at the forefront of, at the front of people's minds. And so whenever they receive a message, particularly when they receive an email message that they're not expecting, etc., get them to be asking the question all the time, is this genuine? Should I actually do what the email is asking me to do, etc.?
That makes sense. So aside from people as being the weakest link, where else are we seeing a pattern of weaknesses?
So one of the common things as well is around poor access management. So starters and leavers processes, for example, not being as good as they could be. I mean, that starts even with doing things like background screening, etc., and making sure you've got competent people that you employ in particular roles in the first place. But it also then goes on to ensuring that you've got appropriate user credentials that are set up for different systems. And so there should be rules around complexity and length of passwords, or probably more importantly nowadays, passphrases that shouldn't be guessable.
Pass what?
So passphrases. So instead of using a single password, which might be, 8 or 10 characters long, consider using multiple words to create a passphrase, which then makes your password, if you like, much longer but easier to remember. And so therefore a lot less easy to guess or to compromise. So in terms of user credentials as well as the complexity and length of passwords, etc., we also recommend that organizations should be using multi-factor authentication. So this is where you have something that you have, something that you know, and something that you are, such as biometrics, etc., that you might use. And again, we're looking at relatively weak numbers there in terms of uptake of multi-factor authentication. About 40% of organizations that responded said that they'd implemented that across their critical systems.
Which is interesting, because I know it's multi-factor authentication being a Cyber Essentials Plus prerequisite. Interestingly, I think we find quite often, from an access control perspective, some of the weaknesses are when people leave and the disconnect between IT, HR, facilities, whatever it is, someone's left, and is their access turned off?
I think again that comes back to the to the first point I made around having documented or formal processes in place for access management. So the starters and leavers process. I think interestingly, in my experience going around different organizations, it's not so much the starter or the leaver piece, it's the bit in the middle. It's if people move from one place to another within the organization, what we should be doing is removing the access from the things they no longer need and giving them access to the new stuff that they need. And that kind of falls between the cracks sometimes.
That makes sense. So then moving on, and probably starting to get a little bit more technical, Mike, coming to you, sort of weaknesses and risks you're seeing?
Yeah, I think the technology obviously forms a smaller part of the overall security landscape, but it is key as part of a lot of the attacks we've discussed. Obviously, ransomware relies on systems, and that's sort of apparent. But even social engineering attacks and phishing, there can be controls in place that can deal with those. If somebody can phish and get credentials, but you've got, say, access that's based on your geographical location, well, if that attacker's not in the same country as you, that's probably going to get blocked. And those are security controls you can put in to help with the human factors. The other things to think about is when you're sourcing software and systems, where is it coming from? Is it reputable? How are you going to maintain it? Do you have a plan in place? Seeing a lot of outdated and unpatched systems, that's never going to stop. People should know by now that you have to patch things, you have to keep them up to date, and the time to maintain them pays dividends later on. And as it says on the slide here, if it's out of date, it's likely that there's going to be an exploit available and you can get infected by malware or ransomware, which will be devastating across your network. The statistic here is that a third of businesses nearly fail to apply software updates promptly. I think people are being quite optimistic with themselves there. I'd say it's probably 2/3 of businesses don't apply software updates promptly.
Yeah.
And also people don't know what software they've got. The number of times we'll assess something and we'll go, oh, you do realize this is over here and it's part of it and you've not updated that bit. And they go, oh yeah, I didn't know about that. And it's that kind of thing where, actually stop, take stock, realize everything you've got and put in a consistent process to deal with it across the board.
Yeah. And that actually, interesting, that's become quite common, has it? When we've done, starting with some of the cyber essentials, but also some of them when we've done testing and we're identifying things that are sitting somewhere that nobody realized was there, probably from a good thing. Hey, the customer wants this, I can spin something up. But actually then how's it managed? Where does it sit? Who's responsible? There's some very key issues there. So when coming back to you, supply chain, I think I don't want to obviously name names, but there's one particular organisation that may support the London Marathon that seems to have been named in numerous incidents.
So it indicates that organisations don't really understand where the risks are when it comes to using third parties for all sorts of different things that they might be using them for. There's a fairly bleak number on there at the bottom bullet. Only 13% of businesses assessed supplier security risks despite an increasing use of third-party services. Everybody's using cloud for something. And lots of organizations that we're coming across now are purely using the cloud. So they don't have physical premises. They're using cloud-based services. But nevertheless, they don't really understand that there are risks involved associated with that. And there can be greater or lesser risk depending upon what that third party is doing for you.
On the technical side, I'm just starting to see an uptick in organizations asking us, hey, we're using these third parties and they're all integrated together, but they say they need admin access to everything in order to work. Is that true? And that's a really good question to ask, because it's very easy when you're supplying in to go, oh yeah, just give us all the access and we'll make it work. But actually you should really be thinking about beyond, is the supplier, have you assessed them from a risk perspective, but also is the technical integration limited as much as it could be? Because if they've got admin access and they get compromised, well, you're compromised as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And someone's just put a question in the chat. Is this your understanding of suppliers and having some form of supplier questionnaire, supplier screening, insisting on controls, or what do we mean here when we're talking about kind of like supply chain?
Yeah, you've got to determine that risk somehow. You've got to know what sorts of controls those third parties have in place. So therefore, yes, sending out questionnaires to suppliers is one of the ways in which you're going to determine that sort of information. And to Mike's point as well, one of the things, especially if you've got lots of suppliers, one of the things that's worthwhile doing is categorizing your suppliers in the first place from the point of perceived risk. So if I've got third parties that do have admin access or have access in any way to my systems or have large amounts of my information in their systems, etc., maybe I just categorize them as high risk. Whereas other suppliers that don't have access to anything, I'm going to categorize them as low risk, and I might not even send them a questionnaire because I can do more about sort of just limiting their access to stuff because they don't need it. And I'm going to preempt a question that might come through here as well in terms of sending questionnaires out, because lots of organizations are likely to be using the likes of Microsoft Azure, Amazon, AWS, etc., who quite rightly are not going to respond to the thousands of questionnaires they probably get every year. But that doesn't mean that you can't do your due diligence. You can still look at the terms and conditions associated with the service that you're buying and determine whether the security capability of that service meets your requirement. If not, buy more. These organizations can provide what you need, but you're going to have to pay for it.
Yeah.
So you need to do your own sort of research, really, in those cases.
And Mike, I think from the technical side, when you've decided what you've got and you procure it, configure it, as in switch it on. I think the number of times we see in some of the testing, actually, it's just that certain aspects are there but haven't been configured.
Yeah, I think often it's a rush to get things working and get things live, which I totally get. But then you find that actually all the security capability you've got is just sitting there waiting for later, because somebody will get to it in the end, and they never do. So yeah, do investigate what capability you have and turn it on and even configure it. Why not?
Thanks, Mike. So moving in, when we talk about weaknesses, we've got to think about our response capability and really look at how we're managing an incident. So what are we seeing there? Any trends around there?
Yeah, so one of the things, coming back to the training and awareness piece, really is the fact that attacks are becoming more sophisticated and are easier for attackers to launch, etc. So even the people that might have been stopped from doing it before because it's maybe quite too complex for them or whatever, too technical for them, we've now got artificial intelligence that is available to everyone. And so these attacks are becoming more sophisticated. Messages look more genuine compared to only a few years ago. So therefore, identifying an incident in the first place, or a potential incident in the first place, is one of the key things that we need to do, and encourage, obviously, people to report things that look suspicious and not just assume that they're okay or assume that somebody else will deal with it. So that's the first thing, identifying incidents or potential incidents and reporting them. But then once they're reported, well, what do we do with that? We need to understand to a greater degree of detail what we're going to do when we're presented with a certain kind of incident. So putting formal response plans in place is one of the things that would be a good idea. And as you can see from the stat at the bottom there, 30% of businesses had formal incident response playbooks. In other words, 70% didn't. Can
I just understand, what do we mean by a playbook?
So playbook, essentially, let me think about it as a procedure. Yeah. So a playbook is a document that has a play-by-play set of instructions for someone to follow in the event that an incident happens.
So if X happens, do this.
Do Y,
yeah. Got it. Okay, no, that makes sense. And then I suppose one of the things we do need to consider is what the real cost of a breach is.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of couldn't really avoid these two examples. Yeah. They're obviously extreme examples, but it does kind of bring home the point around brand and trust, reputational damage, things like that. The fact that you can suffer certain kinds of incidents, which means that your customers go elsewhere because of the impact on brand and reputation. So Marks and Spencer, a reputational hit, relatively recently wiped out more than £1 billion from its market value.
And I think actually, based on recent reports of competitors, they saw an uptick, and their sort of numbers are higher, having attracted customers at the time who weren't able to shop where they would normally shop.
Yeah, it kind of illustrates the point, doesn't it? Yeah. You know, and if I can't shop at Marks and Spencer, there are alternatives. Same with Jaguar Land Rover. The impact on the UK economy because they shut down production. So £1.9 billion. There could well be similar sorts of things where people have gone to other manufacturers because JLR weren't able to fulfill contracts or whatever it might be. And then there's another one I've put on there. It's a much smaller organisation, but it gives you an idea of the other kinds of impacts as well. So Kiddo International, the nursery chain, who ended up with a breach of personal information, so photos and data of children and parents, etc. Obviously, the impact is a completely different type of impact.
Yeah.
But so all organisations need to be sort of sitting up and taking note of the types of incidents that are going on and thinking, well, could that happen to me? And then thinking, if it does happen to me, what would be the impact? Might not necessarily be the same impact, but you could be susceptible to the same type of attack.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And I suppose the impact goes beyond the headline number, the brand and reputation. There's I think we're doing some work around this subject. There's a real human impact if you suffer some form of breach, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, we're the type of organisation that gets involved with lots of organisations that might have suffered some kind of impact or breach. Let's face it, if you've suffered some kind of impact, then it's likely that you are going to want to improve things to stop it from happening again. Yeah. And we're the type of organisation that those people will turn to in order to help them improve things. So we come across this in different organisations, and some of the things on there that we've included are things that we've learned over the years when organisations have been handling incidents. So it's not just about the monetary impact. It can have other impacts as well. So think about employee well-being, even from the point of view of the fact that because you're responding to an incident, you've got lots of people working long hours. It disrupts their evening routines. It removes time availability with their families. It stops them doing things that they want to do over the weekend because they're at work.
Yeah.
And we need to, or organizations need to understand that those kinds of things are happening. Mental health is in the headlines quite a lot for lots of different reasons with lots of different organizations. And it's something I think that management and organizations need to be taking note of. And it's not necessarily just the people that are involved directly with the incident management thing either, because there are other areas of the business. So think about the call center.
Yeah.
If you've got people on the front line taking calls from customers who are themselves stressed and angry because they can't get access to your website or are not receiving the goods or services that you're contracted to provide them, etc., and they're having to deal with those calls. And that can be quite a stressful environment. I've worked in places previously that have been big on the call center thing and listened to calls that our call center agents have to handle, and it can be quite a stressful role to be in. So it's something else to take note of. And also, we probably should think about leadership and the impact on the people at the top, because they do hold the accountability for the things that go wrong in their organization, and they carry the can if something goes wrong. It could be a financial impact. I've seen top management restructuring going on off the back of incidents. People lose their jobs, etc., and so that can be a stressful place to be. And on top of that, obviously management are the people that everyone else turns to. Yeah. So we've got loads of stressed people within the organization that are turning to management and asking them to make things better.
Yeah.
And so management are feeling guilty about those kinds of impacts as well. There's lots of things for us to consider in terms of the human cost of breaches that are not necessarily as visible as some of the other things that we've talked about.
Which again is reinforcing that message about understand your environment, do the most you can do, and be prepared, going back to the old mottos.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So sort of moving on, there's a lot of things to consider, and there's a lot of things we need to be mindful of. But what can we do? So I think there is a limitation as to how much organisations can do. There is a limitation as to how much they can spend or how much they can invest. So what can we do to step through some of the approaches for strengthening our defences, some more practical, but, what are some of the decisions we can be making? So if we start with governance.
Yeah. So I think the key thing, and I might mentioned it earlier on in terms of not knowing what software you've got, etc. I think you've got to start this process from a point of view of knowing what you've got.
Yeah.
So if we think about cybersecurity, information security, whatever you want to call it, it's about protecting the information assets. So whether that is your HR data or customer data or whatever it is. And so you need to know what that information is. What is it I'm trying to protect?
Yeah.
And then once I know what it is, I need to know where it is. Is it in various databases? Is it on the C drive of people's laptops? Is it being processed by different applications that we've implemented? Is it being communicated to different parts of the organization? Is it being communicated externally to third parties, etc.? So we need to have the starting point of understanding what we've got. And we can start asking ourselves, well, if something's going to go wrong, what would that be? Is that a compromise in terms of a breach of confidentiality, i.e. people getting access to information that they shouldn't have? Is it an integrity kind of impact? So is the information altered in any unauthorized manner, or is it not being kept up to date, etc.? Or is it an availability issue? Systems are just not available, or the information is just not available. And once we know what the type of impact is, we kind of need to know what the importance is of that impact. How important is it to protect this information from a breach of confidentiality?
Yeah.
And ask the same question for the types of impact for all of the different information assets you've identified. Then you can start asking the questions around, well, what could cause those impacts? Where are the threats coming from, etc.? And then we can start talking about what to do about it. But unless you know what you've got and where it is, you're going to run into trouble. And to be quite honest, I see it all the time.
Yeah.
When we work with organizations doing risk assessments, the first thing we do is an asset discovery process. We go around different parts of the organization, asking the heads of departments, etc., what are your important information assets and where are they? And you'd be surprised to see the look on some information security managers' faces when they realize all of the information assets that exist that they didn't previously know about.
No. And I think probably an important point to make is, in this increasingly digital world, a lot of the threats we're talking about are more the cyber-related threats. But equally, that then becomes this assumption in terms of assets. Well, IT will know all about it, but they don't own those assets, do they?
No.
They might be heavily involved in protecting them, but they don't own them, so they shouldn't be valuing them and they shouldn't be considering their importance.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Okay. Sort of moving on beyond that, this is a continuous process, isn't it? This isn't I'll do this once a year like we were talking about awareness training. This is very much a continuous process, isn't it?
Yeah, I think going back a number of years, organizations might do a risk assessment on an annual basis and leave it at that. I think things have moved on quite significantly because of the use of technology and the use of third parties in the cloud, etc., and the ease of development of sophisticated attacks, as we've been talking about. You need to understand what those threats are on a day-to-day basis, and you need to know where they come from in order to identify whether or not that alters your risk profile.
Yeah. And
therefore, you might want to do something else in addition to what you've already done off the last risk assessment that you did.
So we just had a question put in saying it's not realistic for us as a small organisation to be doing daily risk assessments. How do we manage with limited resources being more aware of the threats?
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily about doing daily risk assessments. It's about ensuring that you are well informed about the different threats that could materialize on a day-to-day basis, and having processes in place to ensure that you are able to analyze that information and evaluate it to determine which ones I need to take notice of and therefore work with, and which ones I can ignore. It's just about being informed and taking action when necessary.
Okay. To do that, you've also got to know where your vulnerabilities are, haven't you?
Yeah, and this might be something that Mike might want to talk about in terms of, systems and where those vulnerabilities might exist, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you'd hope that the technology would be easy to look after, but I think we've all worked out by now that's not as straightforward as it would seem. Otherwise, I'd be out of a job, frankly. So you can see, the systems, they get outdated. And while you can see, just by checking the version number that it's out of date, what does that mean? What's it vulnerable to? These can all help you prioritize. And then it comes back to the threats. If something's out of date, but it's not vulnerable to anything that you know of, well, maybe that's, lower down the likelihood list or the impact list. Alongside this, a lack of training and awareness that opens the door to phishing attacks and social engineering, which again will draw into technical weaknesses as well. We said this earlier: turn things on and configure them. The number of times we see clients who've got antivirus software, for instance, that just isn't set up very well, and we can work around it. It's great to have it, but you should know what its capability is, and you should be able to assess that and improve it over time. And the last bullet point around vulnerability scanning and penetration testing, yes, do it. These are great ways to identify the vulnerabilities that exist within your organization, but they're not the limit. If you've got assets and you're not sure how you can assess them, talk to a supplier, and they should be able to work with you and work out something they can do in order to help you assess and improve the security of anything.
Yeah, no, thanks, Mike. And then this is probably coming back, we touched on this a little bit earlier. We need to keep this under review, don't we?
Yeah, keep an eye on things. How effective are the controls that I've implemented? So when we talk about controls, they're simply actions that you take in order to mitigate some of the things that we've been talking about. Controls can be all sorts of different things. It can be people controls or processes, procedures. It could be technology, etc. But we need to know whether or not it works. And so we should be monitoring and measuring their effectiveness on an ongoing basis, regular enough so that you can spot trends where things are starting to come undone because a control is not as effective as it could be. So it gives you the opportunity to make adjustments, maybe replace a control with something else or improve that particular control, etc. And then in order to give you some of that information, some of the things that you should be doing as well include the testing of the different response processes, whether that's your business continuity plans or your other incident management plans, etc. Make sure you test them on a regular basis, and you can use the output from that testing to make determinations again as to whether or not your systems are working as effectively as they could be.
Yeah, no, okay, that makes a lot of sense. And we've talked before about awareness training, and this all sort of links back around culture, doesn't it? In terms of what's your culture, how aware are you? Have you got individuals that have you done enough training? Do people understand when to raise a hand?
Yeah, I think we touched on this earlier on in terms of the weaknesses associated with awareness of our general user population. So training, yes, do it at induction, but make sure you do it regularly thereafter. Yeah. But it's not necessarily just about repeating the training that you did at induction or repeating the training that you did last year. You should be doing relevant training. So training material should be updated based upon the current threat landscape, etc. And on top of the formal training and awareness, we should probably be sending out regular emails, newsletters, telling people what's going on in the big wide world and what they need to be looking for, etc. But one thing to realize, I think, is that the training and awareness program shouldn't be a fire and forget kind of solution. You need to do the analysis of your training to determine whether or not it's effective. So have some kind of knowledge testing built into it as well, because it's all right people sort of watching a PowerPoint presentation or watching a training video or whatever, but do they really understand what they've been told? And would they be able to put into practice what they've learned? The only way you're going to know that is by testing. So some kind of test or exam or whatever at the end of the training in order to gauge their understanding. And that will also give you some information about the content of the training. If there's lots of people that are getting a specific question wrong, then that might point to the relevant training slide being not as good as it could be, and so that enables you to improve, etc.
Someone's just asked a question: should I be doing regular phishing training? So I assume that probably means should I be regular sending out dummy phishing emails?
It's becoming quite a popular thing, and I don't see any reason why not. It's certainly going to enable them to identify those more sophisticated attacks, what to look for, etc. Probably worth following up, though. Don't just do the test and publish the numbers. You should follow up with pointers to sort of say, well, you should have recognized A, B, and C that would identify it as a phishing attack.
Yeah. And training, as we've got on the final bullet, needs to be focused in terms of you've got specific roles. I know a really common one is a finance team. Make sure you're working with them on a regular basis around, if someone says, here's my bank details I've updated, use multiple ways of checking that involve speaking to somebody as well as getting an email response. So there's some specific things you can do around role-based where you're more vulnerable as well, isn't there? Yeah,
on top of the general training and awareness stuff, there are going to be various roles around the organisation that require tailored training. The finance one is a good one. There's obviously technical training that would be useful for some people within the organisation, within your IT teams. Your incident response teams, for example, don't assume that the people that you've earmarked as being members of the incident response team know how to respond to incidents.
Yeah.
If they're going to be important on the incident response team, give them some training around how to handle incidents.
Yeah, no, some great pointers here. Mike, looking specifically around technology, I hear a lot about layered protection. Can you elaborate? What do we mean about a layered protection?
Yeah, it's probably layered protection. You can also think about defense in depth is another term you hear a lot. And what this is there shouldn't just be one control or one thing in the way stopping something happening. You should have multiple things in the way. And anybody that's had a pen test done before, you'll see a long list of findings, and you'll see some of them are rated as low. And you'll go, well, what if it's low? Why are you telling me? Why does it matter? And it feeds into this defense in depth mentality where actually the small things all add up. Yeah. And if I can do this small thing and that small thing and the other small thing, and something tells me something else, well, using that information, I can actually do something quite large. So it's always worth thinking about putting things together and how they can be connected and how lots of small things can cause a big problem. In terms of the technology and the testing, I think, the people and processes, the phishing engagements and social engineering cover those. Obviously offices as well. I think it's worth considering the impact if somebody gains access to premises. I've done engagements before where my job has been to stick stickers on PCs to demonstrate that I could have plugged a device in. You can steal data that way. That famously some years ago that happened at a high street bank, which is not really what you want the person behind the counter sending all the details out. It's worth, monitoring and measuring critical systems and processes. I think logging and alerting can be overlooked. IT teams are stressed. They're worked hard. Security is a tangential role to IT. Not everyone's got the memo yet that there should be a security team that's independent of the IT team. Who's seeing the alerts? Who's got access to the logs? What are you doing as a result of them? They're responding to the outputs. You've got your playbooks, as we mentioned earlier. In technical realm, you can have runbooks, which is like a playbook, but the computer does it for you. It's an automated response. We can have those things done. And testing, do these tests regularly. If you're on the ball, you should know what your capabilities are. So you should be able to assess those capabilities, check everything's working as expected, but then also push a bit further, go out your comfort zone and go, oh, well, actually, we can't see that. Let's work with an organization and try and get them so we can see it. That would commonly take the form of like a purple team exercise, where I would be the red team, so I'm the bad guys, and I come in and do a load of stuff. And then I talk to your defenders who are the blue team and say, what did you see? What did you not see? Oh, well, at 10:05, I did this. Let's look at your logs. Oh, well, it was there, but you didn't actually have an alert set. And, piece by piece, you can build up capability to respond to stuff. And, the sooner you see it, the less impact there's going to be.
So Mike, someone's asked a question about penetration testing that said, I use an external organisation. Let me read it again. I use an external organisation to do penetration testing. I do vulnerability assessments internally. Should I do the same testing every year, or should I look to do different kinds of tests? And I've got a limited budget. Where should it be focused? That's quite a broad question.
It's a really good question. It's one we come up against quite a lot. I think this is where you sort of see the dichotomy of compliance and security. Depending on what you want to achieve is going to depend on what you do. If you want compliance, so you want to be able to go, hello, customers, we have had an pen test. Here is a set of results with no highs in. Well, you probably want to do the same thing each year, but that's not going to help you improve because you do the same thing every time, you get the same results every time. If you if you want to improve your security, it's worth actually considering everything else you've done. You've done some threat modeling. You kind of know what you're worried about. Well, let's maybe try and see how likely those things are to happen. Let's mix it up a bit. Let's give somebody a foothold on the network and let them play and see where they can get. And that's when you'll see more interesting reports that actually should encourage people to improve security a bit more, as opposed to another report you file in a cabinet for another year.
Yeah. So there is an element of contractual requirements, probably customer-facing systems. They need testing on a regular basis. But other than that, think about how far you could go, how you could diversify slightly. That's going to give you a different lens into your environment.
Yeah, and just because something's bespoke doesn't mean it's necessarily going to be expensive. I think, it's always worth having the conversation, because if you don't ask, you don't know.
Yeah. And I guess key point, you've done your tests, you've done your analysis, you've run your vulnerability scans, you have some results. You must act on them. Don't ignore them.
Yeah, I've been at customers before where they've said, we're not doing any more testing because we've got cabinets full of these reports and we've tested the same thing 10 times and we've not fixed it because all different departments were responsible for their own service procurement. Vulnerability management is key as well. Once you get results of checks or you find out what something's like, feed it back centrally, have an overall view and a managed way of dealing with it. Because just having a load of reports together and occasionally fixing something doesn't really cut it now.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. And then we come back to operations and the supply chain. We've spoken about the supply chain and trying to better understand your supply chain. There are a number of breaches that do come up the chain as such, aren't there?
Yeah, I think it's one of the things to mention at this point is that we're not necessarily, when we are doing these risk management processes in the supply chain, we're not necessarily going to the supplier and doing a risk assessment for them. What we're evaluating is the risk of working with a particular supplier.
Yeah.
And so we mentioned questionnaires earlier on that you could send out to these suppliers. And some of the questions should be around, how do you manage your supply chain?
Yeah.
Do they understand the risks associated with their suppliers that ultimately could compromise your information or your systems? So it's about understanding if there's a risk of working with a particular organization. And you've got to ask yourself as well, sort of, what am I expecting here? What types of things could come up? So, for example, what about the physical location of the information that the third party that I'm using could be exposed to? So, both from the point of view of, am I transferring information to this organization that might be overseas, and is that desirable?
Yeah.
Or even from the point of view of, do they have round-the-clock support teams that are supporting my environment? Is it okay to allow somebody in Eastern Europe or the Far East or the USA or wherever it might be to have access to my systems to provide that support?
Yeah.
It really depends on, going back to what the sort of drivers are making us look at our cybersecurity, what's expected in terms of our customers, etc. What is the data? Where is it allowed to be, etc. And also think about what I need to do when I move away from a supplier.
If it's the exit plans.
Yeah, so exit plans. So do I have processes in place to ensure that any information that they have in their possession is either returned or destroyed?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think that's one that's often overlooked. So for the last 10 minutes, we're going to look at preparing for the inevitable. I think it's probably better to approach this on the, I am likely to come under attack, or I do come under attack. Something could happen. And what am I going to do in those circumstances? So how do you minimize the impact when a breach occurs?
I think the simple answer to that is you've got to test your response. Well, how do you test your response if you're not under attack, if you're not experiencing incidents? And that is, you need to formulate a test plan. So how do I identify what tests I should conduct? Well, base it on the risk assessments that we talked about earlier on. So if I've identified highly impactful risks or highly likely risks, or a combination of the two, those are the things that I should test more often and sooner. That will enable us to identify whether or not our response program, our response plans actually work as expected. Until we've tested them or indeed used them in anger, we're not going to know if they're going to be effective. And so, that's the main thing.
Somebody's just asked a question, quite an interesting one. Do I pull the plug?
So a response I always get told off on these things for using, but
you can't say it depends.
Well, I'm afraid it depends. It depends on what you're looking to do, and in your plans somewhere should be a decision point where you make the decision on when to cut off services, etc. Yeah. So pull the plug, meaning I've cut off access to the internet, so that kills the attack. But it also kills any genuine access from your customers, etc. And so you have to sort of weigh up the cost of the impact of the incident itself against the impact of your customers losing access.
Yeah.
And once the impact of the incident outweighs your customer access, that's when you should pull the plug. But there are loads of other criteria that would come into play as well. It may just well be that the management decide that, I don't want this incident to continue, we'll just pull the plug. There could be legal and regulatory requirements. One of the things to consider is whether or not you want to prosecute someone at the end of the day. And if you do, then you're going to need evidence in order to do that. And if you pull the plug, your evidence might get tainted or there may not be enough.
But I guess this all comes back to, these are some of the decisions you need to make in advance. These are some of the things you need to be thinking about now. How far can I go? What would I do? So actually, should something happen, you do what it says on you do what it says on the tin.
Yes. Yeah. And include it in your playbooks, as we called them earlier on.
And a key part of this is thinking about communication, isn't it?
So you need to keep people informed regarding what's going on. We saw one of the bullet points, I think, on the human factors slide that we talked about earlier on. If people don't know what's going on, they speculate, rumours start, etc., and people fear the worst. So keep them apprised of the situation. Obviously, you're not going to give away lots of technical details, etc., and you're not going to give away sensitive information, but at least keep them briefed with regard to whether or not they've got anything to worry about, etc. And again, these communications processes are things that can be planned in advance.
Yeah.
And so it gives you the opportunity to include specialists, whether it be PR firms or legal advisors, etc., around what you should say and what you shouldn't say and when you should say it, etc. And it depends on who you're talking to as well, whether it's an internal communication or an external communication. And you may even have different communications for different customers. You may have key customers who might want a face-to-face communication, and then everybody else who gets a standard email.
And another important point to bear in mind is you need to understand whether you've got insurance, because if you're invoking insurance, it's likely that there will be a legal team or professional team that then would start controlling communication. So you really need to understand what that looks like, how you get them involved, how quickly you get them involved. So again, these are good things to understand now on the be prepared front, aren't they?
Even down to the point of when you take out insurance, understand what those processes might be if you need to make a claim, basically.
Yeah. And looking at the human impact, I think we've covered quite a lot of this as we've been talking. But again, this is about making sure you've got the right culture and communications internally as well, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's also based on some of the experiences that some organisations have talked to us about. So the first bullet, for example, one or two organisations have said that because our organisation has a positive culture, etc., then people were supporting each other, and were able to get through the process in a much more comfortable way, if you like. As part of that, within that positive culture, it's more likely potentially that team members will go to management and say, "Oh, such and such is struggling; they might need to take a break or whatever." We talked about providing transparent updates, keeping people informed. Make sure people know what they want to do. I mentioned training earlier on for the incident response team, etc. So make sure that they've got tasks to do and that they know how to do those tasks. And so therefore, the amount of stress is reduced because they know what they're doing, etc.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And it's really important to think through those factors. And that's where your exercising incident preparation comes in. Key part also is maintaining stakeholder trust, isn't it? And some form of continuity if you're able to.
Yeah. So, business continuity and stakeholder trust. So making sure that your services are available when they're needed. And that may well be associated with your customers, etc., being a stakeholder type. So it's all about availability and making sure that you can continue to operate even though in the background there's an incident going on. So ensuring that when it comes to network design and things like that, the availability of those processes is enhanced because you've got redundant or resilient systems, etc.
That makes sense. So last 4 minutes, key pitfalls to avoid. What are the key things to take away from today?
So quickly running down that bullet point list in terms of backups, one of the big things that we mentioned earlier on is ransomware. Your ability to recover from backups is going to be key associated with that kind of thing. I've got something on the slide there called immutable offline backups. In other words, something that can't be altered once it's been written. So if I'm infected, that backup can't get infected. So it can be used to recover. With regard to your incident response plans, get into the details. Make sure that whoever is following the plan knows exactly what to do at any stage in the incident. Because at the end of the day, it could be anybody that's running the incident. That your normal people may not be available for whatever reason. They might be off site. It might be in the middle of the night or whatever. Don't assume it won't happen to you because we said earlier on it's inevitable. It's going to happen to you. So make sure you've got plans in place. Identify who your incident response team members are going to be and be aware that they may not be available. They may be on holiday. So identify deputies as well. Give them training. If you need expert advice, I mentioned the use of PR firms and legal organizations. IT specialists as well might need to be involved. We mentioned about considering insurance. Yes, consider it, but make sure you read the small print. Don't assume your communications channels won't be affected. So we talked about the importance of keeping everybody informed, but if the incident is affecting the systems that you usually use for communication, then you need an alternative. Yeah. So make sure you've got, everybody's mobile phone number so you can send them a text message. It could be anything. Test awareness, test people, test the knowledge, loads of testing. And the more testing you do, when you get a real incident, it will just work, or should. It will be closer to just working than if you didn't do any testing.
So thank you both very much indeed. I've tried to weave the questions in as we've gone along. If there are any questions that are outstanding, we will reach out to you with those answers. So off the back of the webinar, we've got an offer that's running a cybersecurity health check at a reduced cost just for attendees. This is going to look at a high-level assessment of your cyber resilience. And we're going to look at all the areas we've spoken about today: governance, supplier management, compliance, risk management, incident response, testing, monitoring, technical controls, and give you a high-level overview of kind of where you sit from a cyber resilience perspective. If you can just indicate on your feedback form if that's something you're interested in, and we'll reach out. Coming up now, some events we've got to coming. So next week, we've got Cyber Essentials Plus. There's some changes coming out to the question set, but talking about ongoing compliance and how to manage that and how to achieve certification success. And then in early December, improving your organisation's resilience. So that's looking at 22301, the business continuity standard, but really focusing on improving your organisation's resilience. If you can please complete your feedback form, because that shapes what other events we run. If there's anything that would be of interest, please let us know. Let us know if you'd like access to the slides or the recording, and if you're interested in the health check. Once again, Mike, Wayne, thank you very much indeed for being with me today. Thank you for everybody for listening.